Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Maximize Your Potential, a show where we explore theories, practices, and leadership areas where you can become your best version of yourself and maximize your potential. I'm delighted today to have a terrific guest, Mike Meyer, who I will turn it over to quickly. But Mike is someone that I've known for a number of years and had the distinct pleasure of working with him when he was the CHR at Ecolab. But think incredibly highly of him as a leader, both as an HR executive, as a business leader who's managed businesses globally, but also as a wonderful and terrific executive coach. So hello, Mike.
Hey, John, good to be with you.
Good to be with you as well. Hey, thank you for carving out some time for us.
My pleasure.
Awesome. Well, would you be willing to just tell folks a little bit about yourself?
You didn't tell me you were going to ask me that question, John.
Well, you're good at living in the moment. Impromptu is best.
John, thanks. I really am looking forward to the conversation today. So you kind of said it. From a career standpoint, I was a CHRO at Ecolab. Most of my career was in HR, but I also did have the opportunity to run an international medical device business in my previous company. I kind of stumbled into all of this, got an MBA in international business when I was looking to make a pivot in my career early on. And then for the last 8 years, I've been retired, quote unquote. I've been doing executive coaching.
That's wonderful. Well, one of the reasons I was so excited to talk to you is not only have you been a highly successful leader yourself, but you've worked and coached a number of highly successful leaders, both as an internal and then now obviously as an executive coach. So I'd love to hear more about leadership. But before we go there, what energizes you? What motivates you these days?
I go back to some of your listeners might be familiar with the Hogan instrument, and I go back to that. And the couple of things that popped out of that. One is altruism, which is maybe a little unusual for a business executive, but I really enjoy supporting and helping others and in maximizing their potential, achieving their goals and objectives. And then the other one from the Hogan was commerce. I'm very interested in business and how businesses become successful, what causes them to succeed and to fail. From a personal standpoint these days, because I am able to kind of steer my own ship, I love the autonomy, the independence, the ability to create. I've written a book, working on a second one potentially. So those kinds of things are super energizing for me as well.
That's nice. Nicely said. One of the questions I like to ask people is, how do you define success?
I don't have it with me, but I carry this definition of success in my wallet. It's a Ralph Waldo Emerson quote on success, and any of the people who are on the call can Google Emerson on success. But basically, what it says is, definition of success is highly personal, and for me, it's kind of just helping make the world a little bit better than a little bit better place than it was yesterday. And for me, I do that kind of one person at a time, one situation at a time. And if I've done that, at the end of the day, I can look back and say, yeah, that was a good day, that was a successful day.
Nice.
So I'm more at the micro at this point as opposed to the macro.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we all define it differently, right? And then the question is, how, to your point, personally, do we go about trying to achieve that success? Just a quick question on that. Has your definition changed when you were
Absolutely.
C-suite executive versus today?
Yeah, that's a great question. Absolutely. Well, I'd say I always had that kind of micro definition, but probably as an executive, I had more of a macro definition in terms of accomplishing goals and objectives, helping make the organization better, helping it to achieve bigger objectives. So I certainly had probably a more expansive definition of success when I was part of a bigger organization. So yeah.
That makes sense. Context matters, right? And
yeah, absolutely.
Different things come to the fore as we evolve. I find that as I get older, I react and respond to things differently.
Absolutely. Yeah. and
Excellent.
helping people to be more, I guess, true to themselves, more congruent. Um, that was a big part of my success as an executive, especially in the HR arena, and it still is today. I think that's kind of the through line for all of that. Yeah.
I think it's very true. As someone who worked with you, I would say that characteristic defined you, and be able to have balance, right, and being able to do both, achieve results, but also lead in the right way, which you always did. So I'd love to pick your brain a little bit about, you work with a lot of successful leaders. In your view, what do successful leaders do that differentiates them from those who may be less successful?
Well, you just said something just a moment ago, which I think is kind of the key. And that is, it's not just the what, but the how. And, it's one thing to achieve results. It's another thing in terms of how you achieve them. And, well, I was really privileged, John, in my career. I worked with 3, I would say, world-class CEOs. One at Ecolab and 2 prior to that in my previous company. That is pretty unusual to be able to work with 3 long tenured executives who made tremendous impact on not only their organizations and the people and the business, but the communities around them. And brilliant strategists, outstanding leaders, good human beings, I guess. Some of the things that I've observed in those 3 data points, each one of them worked on themselves every day. They were not satisfied with themselves. I used to talk about being chronically dissatisfied. It's maybe not the best psychological trait, but
deficit-based, but it works.
Exactly. But they were working on themselves, and they knew that they wanted to be better. The other thing that all 3 of them did is they sought out different perspectives and opinions, and they listened and they triangulated that, and they tried to understand things from a variety of different viewpoints, not just taking their own perspective as orthodoxy. And by the way, also not just taking 1 or 2 kind of go-to people as that either. They really talked to people broadly and tried to understand things from different perspectives. Another thing that they did was they set, bold visions and a strategy for the organization, but they also realized that while strategy is vital, in the end, it's most companies' execution is, executing on that strategy and being able to respond and adapt depending on local conditions was critical. And so they would build organizations that were very capable of strong execution. Mm-hmm. And then I guess the last thing, John, I would say is they worked hard at building the capability and the capacity of the organization. In terms of not just capabilities and competencies, but resilience and adaptability, and be able to stretch and grow. So they were organization builders, and the best CEOs don't like to talk about legacy, but if you think about what they left, and 2 of those 3 are retired now, they left incredibly talented people and organizations that will clearly continue to grow and prosper beyond them. So they weren't dependent on them for the future.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, I think as you described that, I think of having a sense of purpose, leveraging a sounding board, right, empowering people. I think to your point, at least the one that I work with, right, the ability to inspire people to want to do something for themselves, but also for the greater good of the organization, the community. I remember those being highly motivating to me, for sure.
Yeah, and absolutely, and connecting people to the why of the organization, connecting, Simon Sinek, you connecting their why to the organization why. I mean, that's what gets you up in the morning and gets you excited to go to work. And so having that sense of purpose, that mission, and being able to to contribute it to it in a meaningful way. Those leaders all did that, and so at least for me, I was not always, but I was usually excited. Mondays I wasn't so excited, but I was usually excited to get to work and to get going.
Yeah, nothing is universally true all the time, right? And to your point, the inspiring piece for all of us who work there. That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
So on the flip side of that, like what are some of the more common derailers or pitfalls that you see in leaders today that you could share with us?
Yeah. Well, so I'm often called in to coach leaders who maybe have a rough edge that needs sanding, or a potential derailer, as it's called. And oftentimes it's on the people side, the human side. They're jerks, to use a term of art, and they just don't know how to get things done through or with people, or to work, collaboratively. That is surprising, but it's often the differentiator between executives who are effective and successful and those who are not. And in a complex environment like most organizations have today, they just aren't very adept at influence. The command and control really doesn't work so well anymore. Even if you have direct authority over a group of people, they're not going to respond to orders and commands so well. Even with people who are in your direct, pyramid, influence is a far more effective approach. Right. And oftentimes I find that's lacking. That's a derailer. The other things that I see, sometimes people are trying to do too much. They fail to prioritize. They fail to focus on the critical few. I worked with an executive once who had 96 priorities. And after my brilliant intervention, he reduced that to 92.
Were they really called priorities?
Yeah, they were all priorities. And this particular executive has amazing capacity, but unfortunately the people around him didn't have that same capacity, and wanted more of a balance in their lives, and so resented the Sunday or the Saturday night emails saying, can you get this to me by Sunday morning, kind of thing. So there was some work to do there to kind of not just hone that list of priorities, but to think about how you interact with people and respect their boundaries and the other things they like to do with their lives.
Yeah, no, well said. I mean, right, so much of effective leaders is what kind of impact do they have on their organizations, and can you do things at scale, right? Yeah. Which very few people that I know can have 92 priorities and do them exceptionally well.
Yeah. He was exceptional. He is exceptional. But to be a really a great leader, look, when you're CEO or the head of a function or the head of a business, there's not much that you do yourself. There just isn't. You need the people around you, the people in the organization, to be able to deliver on your commitments, on your promises, on your goals and objectives. And so that's the key. And you could have 92 priorities, but you really don't have 92 priorities.
Yeah.
Because as you say, you can't get them done. So.
Well, to me, that's the beauty of executive coaching too, right? Whether you're on the coaching side or you're the client, which is helping unlock different possibilities of how to go about doing it. And I know you published a great book on, which I love, Work and Win with an Executive Coach. So let's talk a little about that. What's your approach when you work with clients?
Yeah. So let me back up a second, if you don't mind, and talk about please. Why I wrote the book. I was working with an organization, a big retail organization, and I had an HR kind of contact person there, and I was walking with her down the hall, and she looked at me one day and she said, and she was giving me feedback. I didn't ask for it, by the way. but she was giving me feedback.
Unsolicited feedback's the best feedback.
Yeah, it was a gift. Who put that feedback in my coffee? So anyway, it was actually very helpful. But she asked me how my clients, and I was working with 10 people in the organization at that time. She asked me how my clients could get greater benefit and leverage from the coaching work that we were doing. And I started to answer her, and then I stopped and I started to think, and my mind started racing. And a year later, I gave her the answer in the form of a book. So, and the purpose of the book, the reason I wrote it is for a client. All the coaching books, or many of the coaching books that are out there, are for other coaches, or primarily for other coaches or HR people. And I wanted a book that a client could use to get the most out of the coaching engagement. There's clients make a big investment. Obviously, there's a financial investment, but that's actually the smallest part of it. They make a big investment in terms of time when they're working with a coach. And also, I'd say reputation, hey, I'm working with a coach. What is that? What does it mean? What are you trying, all the questions that come out. Is something wrong? So there's a big investment in coaching. And I just wanted to make sure that executives got the ROI from that coaching engagement. And so that's why I wrote the book. It's kind of a companion as an executive was working with a coach. I always say, executive coach, as an executive coach, give clients a couple gifts. And one of the gifts is greater self-awareness. And look, we're all self-aware. The executives that I work with are self-aware, obviously. But we aren't always fully cognizant of the impact of our behavior on others. And frankly, at least my observation is, the higher up you go in an organization, the less feedback you get. There's like an inverse relationship, something I've never fully understood. I mean, I understand, but I don't understand. But it seems like as you get into the executive ranks and into the C-suite, suddenly you're not hearing anymore how you're doing. And you don't understand. You don't, and sometimes you believe your own stuff, and you don't, understand how you're impacting others. And so one of the two things that I do with executives is help them to raise self-awareness. And I do that through interviews, primarily stakeholder interviews. Sometimes we'll do some other assessments. So that, excuse me, the first couple of months is really focused on raising self-awareness. And then we shift from that into action planning, put together a development plan, and then spend the balance of the coaching engagement working the plan. So translating kind of awareness to results. I'll just tell you, there's a great quote from my favorite executive coach. Excuse me, I got a little frog in my throat.
No, go ahead.
My favorite executive coach is the martial artist, Bruce Lee. Most of your viewers might be too young for Bruce Lee, but he was a famous movie martial artist in the 60s and 70s. And Bruce Lee said, I'll paraphrase, it's not enough to know, one must apply. And so that's my theory of coaching is it's great to know, but it's not enough. It's necessary, but not sufficient. You've got to take it and do something with it. And the to do is how do I become a better leader? And that's what we work on the second half of the engagement.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I think your initial point around feedback, right? It's an interesting paradox. The more influential or the more well-established people become, right? Maybe the less access they have to information, or maybe the less receptivity they have towards it. When in fact, that's when it's most critical, particularly when you're making decisions that impact the lives of so many people. But I love what you shared around why you wrote the book, which I was going to come back to later. But since you talked about it, I mean, why don't we go there? What I thought was a terrific resource, both for people who want to become an executive coach, but also for people who are considering using a coach, right? Because I think your book, better than most, describes the process, the methodology, how both stakeholder groups should think about the relationship,
Yeah.
and is a really valuable resource for anyone who's
Yeah.
considering becoming a coach or wanting to hire a coach. Because I think there's so many coaches out there today that and yet so many and additionally so many people are using coaches, but I don't think it's well understood how the engagements typically take place and how coaches actually work with clients. So I appreciate you both having written the book, but also sharing it today.
Well, I appreciate that, John. That's great feedback. I didn't realize that so many coaches would read the book and appreciate it, or prospective coaches, people who were considering going into coaching. But I started to get a lot of questions, and I sit down with people all the time, people who are interested in perhaps considering coaching as the next step in their career path. And the book really helps people in terms of understanding what's involved and laying out a process. And they found it helpful as well. The only other thing I would say about in terms of content in the book is there is a section in there on selecting a coach. So, and why work with a coach and how to select a coach, which I think is particularly useful because a lot of the executives that I work with, they've never worked with a coach before. They really don't know what to look for. They don't know how to interview a coach, what questions to ask, how to evaluate. And so I put a section in there just for people who are trying to figure it out. What is this? What am I going to get out of it? And how do I choose?
Yeah. Well, I love it. I mean, I'd love to stay there just for a minute because I think that's been my experience as well. As I've worked with highly successful leaders who want to coach, and then others who may be facing some challenges in the role, right? I mean, it does require a level of vulnerability on the part of the coaching client. And frankly, they're making a very big decision, to your point, an investment of time to be able to work with someone, right? And so to have that mutual level of respect and know what you're getting into. But then to be able to collaborate and really, truly get to work on what's most important, right? I mean, I often ask clients, like, ultimately, how is this currently serving you, right? And is it helping you achieve your goals and objectives? And I find so many of us are working so hard at something that, to your point, we lose sight of what's truly most important or what we're doing it for. So I'm curious to know, as you work with your clients, I appreciate you sharing the methodology, right? But what are some critical observations that you might have for people who are exploring, hiring a coach or working with a coach?
Well, many times people are in organizations it's suggested to them that they work with a coach, and sometimes, I mean, it's for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes it's somebody who is a potential successor or has potential to move up in the organization, and they need to work on a skill or refine a skill. Oftentimes, as they're moving up the career path, they need to move into more strategic roles and become more strategic, learn how to manage larger organizations, work at an executive level, develop that influence we talked about. So those are some of the things that I see. But oftentimes, people are kind of led to, you got to work with a coach. Sometimes it's, as I said, because people who have a serious derailleur or maybe are developing a serious derailleur, and occasionally it's somebody who's really teetering from a career standpoint. Not so much anymore. Most organizations don't bring in a coach for somebody who's kind of on the edge, the precipice. That used to be the case. If you go back 20 or 30 years, I had a mentor, one of the first executive coaches. He was a PhD psychologist, and he was brought in almost exclusively when there was a CEO who they loved him, but they were going to get rid of him if he didn't fix his interpersonal stuff. And that's not so much the case anymore. Most of the people that I work with are people who are pretty functional. And look, we all have areas for growth and development. That, none of us is perfect. I guess what I would tell people is, be all in. I actually have on my LinkedIn page how to, kind of a 5 or 6 points on this, but, be in it to win it. Get the most out of it. This may be your only chance to work with somebody like this in this capacity. So just, get everything out of it that you can. I don't do a lot of homework stuff, but there is some work involved. So do the work, prepare. Most of the benefit or the gain from this experience does not happen in our 1-hour coaching sessions that we have every 2 or 3 weeks. Most of the benefit happens in between. Putting into action, into practice, some of the things that we've got on the action plan, some of the things that we're talking about. And so that's where the learning happens. That's where the growth happens. There's a wonderful book that was written, 30 years ago, perhaps. It's called Lessons of Experience. It's by some people at Center for Creative Leadership. And the main point of the book is that most of the development that happens for executives happens on the job. It happens in the doing and not in the contemplating. And there's some really kind of formative or critical experiences that executives have, which really shape them. And people is one of them. So if you're working with a coach, if you're working with an outstanding leader, get everything you can out of that.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, I think, at least for me, early in my career, most of the career coaching engagements that we hired consultants or coaches for were someone was struggling in the role, right? And I'm grateful that shifted, because it's a different dynamic, right? Depending on who the sponsor is and who's the client and what's the nature of the engagement. But so many more clients today are like, hey, look, how do I think about this particular problem? Or how should I be thinking about an area that I just want someone to be a sounding board or to be a thought partner in, right? And it's just so rewarding to be able to help people figure out even how to think differently about a given situation. And that's the part that's the most rewarding, right? It's the intimacy of being able to work with someone who, whether it's personal or professional, they're sharing what's most important to them and looking for better ways of doing things. And to me, that's the part I love about coaching.
Me too. It's a privilege to work with people. And these are all very smart, accomplished, motivated people. I mean, I'm really lucky. And to be able to help them reframe their challenges and problems, to figure out a new way, a new approach to, I tell people, a lot of people tell me, I don't want to change. And I say, well, that's good, because I can't change it anyway. But what we can do together is develop a broader repertoire. Excuse me. I'm not used to all this talking. But to have more arrows in the quiver, to be able to respond with a different array of ideas and behaviors than what you had in the past. Be able to pick and choose rather than react. Those are the things that I work with on my clients.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, thank you. I'd love to pivot slightly, just because I have deep experience as a C-suite executive, and in particular in HR. And I know a number of folks are HR leaders who are wrestling with some of these issues too, right? But as you think back to your role as an internal, I call it internal when you're inside the organization, senior leader. And there's just a lot going on in the world of HR today. So what's kind of your reaction to the macro trends in the market today?
John, I've never been so glad not to be an HR person. It's a hard job. As you know, you've done it as well. And particularly today, the challenges are so intense. I mean, the pandemic is the obvious one. The last almost 3 years now, all the decisions that had to be made, really big decisions about people's health and well-being, and working from home and all. I mean, it was hard. It is hard. And then what kind of came along with that was, challenges around talent. The the disconnect. I mean, you know, there's what, 2 job openings for every job seeker now, and that has pretty much held true. The labor participation rate is way down. You know, this is the war for talent that McKinsey talked about 20 years ago. It's finally here. And so the challenges for HR people in terms of attracting, retaining, developing talent are enormous. And then I guess the last thing I would say about it is building a culture of an organization. So much harder now and so much more important. Harder because, you know, when people are working in their home offices, culture is just that much more elusive. And I've coached a number of people lately who started in new jobs and new companies, and they've never been out of their house. You know, they work from home at senior level. So how do they get onboarded, you know, inducted into the organization? And then how do they convey the culture to the people on their teams? And yet today's many people are looking for special culture, a place where they can grow and do good work and be part of the why. So, boy, hard to be an HR executive today is what I would say. I empathize with my colleagues.
I always joke, there are always challenges, but it seems more acute today, to your point. I mean, you brought up McKinsey. I heard recently they did some research that, which I was shocked to hear, that 40% of employees are considering seeking new employment in the next 3 months.
Yeah.
And that something like either 70 or 75%, but within that range, believe that they can leave and get a job with equal or better pay tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right. So it speaks to the massive mobility. So what advice would you have for HR leaders or business owners, right, who are really exploring, like, how do I think differently about my people strategy, my employee value proposition, and driving engagement?
Yeah. There are a couple of organizations that are trying to develop tools for leaders, executives, owners, you know, a people first strategy. And I'm not sure that those have fully taken shape, but I guess in my mind, it's you know, got to be one of the top 2 or 3 priorities that somebody who's in a senior role is concerned about and working on and has a plan for. And that includes all of the traditional things that we think about in terms of growth and development and compensation and benefits, culture. But I think beyond that, there are some things that maybe are harder to articulate. And I hesitate to use this word, especially in a business broadcast, but there's something to be said for just pure love, you know, loving your people, just really caring about them in a deep way. And I hesitate to say that because I once attended a huge workshop of HR people 20 years ago, and the speaker talked about that and used that word. And I really just violently reacted and objected to it at the time. I just thought it was so out of place and so kind of squishy. But as I think about it now, and maybe it's just I've changed, but also I think the world has changed. There's something to be said for just caring about your people. You know, there's that expression, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. And I love that expression. And I think there's something to be said for that now in light of the current, you know, challenges that we all face. And then as we've said a couple times already, I think the other thing is just helping people discover their passion, their why, and connecting it to the organization's mission. I think that's so important. And for most of us, as you say, we can go get a job and get paid more. Any of us can do that tomorrow. So it's really about feeling like, geez, this company is, or this organization is really doing something important, and I'm making a big impact there.
Yeah. Yeah, as you say that, right? First is the love piece of affection. It reminds me
Yeah.
of Carl Rogers, the psychological view of like
Yes.
unconditional positive regard.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
And if people feel a sense of belonging or
Yeah.
value or respect, that's going to drive it. The other is, I think, the sense of purpose, right? Like, why do
Yeah.
people get up and want to go work every day?
Yeah.
And is that work valued, right? So
Yeah.
that's absolutely true. As I think more about it, in particular in the context of DE&I and everything else in the workplace, I'd just be curious to ask one last question as it relates to the
Yeah.
workforce and just I think the complexity of trying to create a value proposition that resonates with people of diverse backgrounds and
Yeah.
multi-generational issues.
Yes.
What's your perspective as to how people can try to create that level of either intimacy or connection or organization? You talked about, start with the why,
Yeah.
which I think is a great
Yeah.
recommendation.
Yeah.
What else might you recommend people think about?
Yeah. So John, just a minute of history. I worked in the old days on affirmative action, and then diversity. I actually started the first diversity initiative at my company in the kind of 93, 94 timeframe. What had happened was I went and lived in Asia for a few years, and when I came back, I was changed, and the world was changing too. And I happened to parachute into be the HR leader of a very large and very diverse uh, place in Texas. Really unusual environment, and so we started a diversity initiative, diversity program, and then it evolved over the years to be diversity and inclusion, and then diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think it can, now there's justice that's included sometimes. So the evolution of this work has been really fascinating to see, and really critical. For me, it starts with everybody feels comfortable. Everybody comes to work every day feeling like they can do their best work. They're going to contribute. And so that's kind of the philosophical underpinning. People ask, well, what's the business case? I hope we've kind of gotten beyond that, but sometimes people ask the business case, and to me, it's pretty simple. It's making sure that we have the best talent, and we attract the best talent, and that the best talent can do the best work possible. And then there's been also some studies around diverse teams are more effective teams in terms of decision making and getting things done.
And creativity.
And yeah, creativity, absolutely. Problem solving. And honestly, for me, it's just more fun. I just had a blast working with, and I was lucky because I worked with global teams for really the last half of my career. And I just it was fun. I love the different perspectives and cultures. And yeah, sometimes it was challenging, and sometimes it was like, well, it was hard sometimes, but it was really rewarding work. And in terms of doing it, I think there's the playbooks out there are pretty straightforward. There's a ton of consultants out there doing this work now. Selecting a consultant to help you with it, like selecting a coach. I mean, it's something that you want to think very carefully about, making sure that the consultant is somebody that is a good fit with what you're trying to do in your organization. I think that the danger here is it's just important to remember that this is all for a business purpose. Or for an organizational purpose, if you're, saying a nonprofit. I happen to be working with I'm on the board of two nonprofits right now, and both organizations are working on DEI work with the board, with the staff, et cetera. It's an important part of the identity of these organizations, and they're integral in the community as well. So it's not just confined to business enterprises, for-profit enterprises. But I think putting a plan in place, which includes kind of the thing, communication and values, and metrics, measures, commitments, looking at policies and process. I mean, that, and having groups of employees who can advocate, and those kinds of things. I think I think the ground is pretty well trod now. I think it's pretty, clear what organizations need to do to get there. The thing is now, if you're look, everybody's always starting somewhere on this journey, but a lot of organizations have made a lot of headway. So if you're just getting started now, you got to move fast, because people are looking for. I know my kids, they want to work in organizations that have this as kind of part of their core values and core practices. And if it's not there, they say, "Well, where have you been?" So got to get going.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, as I think about, people are looking at organizations like, what's your position, right? What's your level of commitment? And it doesn't matter where you are on the continuum. It's just a question of, are you generally committed to attracting the best talent and bringing in a diverse group of people and valuing people? I remember being a learning partner for Hannaford when I was 21 years old, and talking to senior executives about my experience, and just really trying to cultivate and prime the pump, right? But then at Ecolab, much more formal. Building the right D&I strategy and to see where that organization has gone over the years, right? But it starts with baby steps. It's just a question of, to your point, you got to take the leap and build out the strategy and make mistakes, but you got to commit to it and keep working it. Well, that's great.
Yeah. The last thing I would say, because I agree with everything you say, is it starts at the top, or it starts with the leadership of the organization. In a sense, I mean, it's really important with that commitment that that the top leaders of the organization are committed to it, that they'll talk about it, that they'll put resources behind it, that they'll hold people accountable for it. That's super important. It's more difficult to do when it's kind of a bottoms up, although there does need to be a bottoms up component to this as well.
Yeah. Well, last piece, and then I want to give you the last word, but I do agree with them. I mean, it's not work that you can outsource. And I do think it's strategic in nature, and leaders have to be fundamentally committed, but many times it's a grassroots efforts too, right? It's people who are willing to have the courage to say, how can we make the organization better, right? Which is true of the essence of like human dynamic and capabilities that people have around maximizing potential, which coming back to the forefront, right? It's how do you help every person in an organization feel valued, respected, and that they can do their best work, like you said. So that's excellent. Well, we've talked for a while, so thank you. I want to give you the last word for folks who want to learn more about you or look you up or get in touch with you. What's the best way to do that?
Oh, John, thank you. First of all, thanks. This has been an absolute blast, and you made it very painless. I appreciate that. But I really enjoyed the conversation. It got me thinking about a lot of things. So I'm MikeMeyerPartners.com or LinkedIn, Mike Meyer. And then my book is on Amazon, Work and Win with an Executive Coach. And look forward to connecting with people.
That's awesome. Well, we've shared your bio, but I appreciate you sharing that. I genuinely appreciate you making the time. I know how busy you are, but I'm also very impressed with all the great work that you're doing. So I very much appreciate it personally, and on behalf of everyone, thank you.
Well, you're welcome. It's been my pleasure, and the feeling is mutual.
All right. We'll talk again soon. Thank you, Mike.
Okay. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.